I wore the sapphire dress to surprise my husband, hoping to reignite our spark. But when I heard his words, "She's an eyesore," that spark became a blaze, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The dress was sapphire blue. It was the kind of dress I hadn't worn in years, the kind that clung in all the right places and made me feel like the woman my husband, Mark, first fell in love with. I'd spent 2 hours on my hair and makeup, trying to recreate the effortless glow I used to have before. Well, before everything. Before the stress of supporting his career became my entire personality, before the 2 little lines on a pregnancy test that vanished a week later, before the slow, creeping weight gain that he so kindly called my comfort padding. Tonight was supposed to be a surprise. Mark was at his company's annual awards gala, a glitzy affair I was usually too tired to attend. That was his excuse anyway. The truth was he hadn't invited me in 3 years. He'd say things like, "Oh, honey, it's so boring, just a bunch of stuffy old men talking about profit margins. You'd hate it." But I saw the pictures online afterwards. It was never stuffy old men. It was sleek women in designer dresses and men with sharp suits and even sharper smiles. My husband, right in the middle of them all, beaming. So tonight, I decided to be one of those women. I told him I was having a girls' night, a little white lie to preserve the surprise. I wanted to see his face when I walked in, to remind him of the woman he'd married, not the frumpy housewife he'd started treating me as. I imagined him breaking off from a conversation, his eyes widening as he saw me across the room. I imagined him striding over, a proud smile on his face, pulling me into his arms and whispering, "Wow, you look incredible." The reality was a punch to the gut. The ballroom was just as glamorous as I'd imagined, all glittering chandeliers and the low hum of self-important chatter. I clutched my small purse, suddenly feeling like a child playing dress-up. I scanned the crowd, my heart doing a nervous little flip-flop, searching for his familiar salt and pepper hair, and then I heard it, his laugh. It was a sound I could pick out of 1,000, a deep, confident boom that always commanded attention. It used to make me feel safe. Tonight, it made my blood run cold. I followed the sound to a corner of the room near the bar. He was surrounded by 3 of his colleagues, all of them laughing along with him, and his arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of a woman. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with impossibly sleek blonde hair and a dress that looked like it was poured onto her. She leaned into him, her head tilted up, gazing at him with an adoration that I recognized because it used to be in my own eyes. I froze behind a large potted palm, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't move. I could only listen. One of his colleagues, a man I recognized as Dave from a disastrous company picnic years ago, gestured vaguely towards the door. "So, is the missus making an appearance tonight, Mark?" He slurred slightly, a cocktail swaying in his hand. Mark let out another one of those booming laughs. He squeezed the blonde's waist, pulling her even closer. She giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my ears. "God, no," Mark said, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered me. I told her I had to work late. Can you imagine her here? He paused for dramatic effect, letting his audience hang on his every word. "I love her, but honestly, she's let herself go. She's an eyesore." The men roared with laughter. The blonde, his mistress, didn't laugh. She just smiled, a smug, satisfied little smirk, and nestled her head against his shoulder. An eyesore. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. The sapphire blue dress felt like a cheap costume. The carefully applied makeup felt like clown paint. Every insecurity he had ever cultivated in me with a backhanded compliment or a helpful suggestion to join a gym bloomed into a monstrous certainty. He didn't just not love me anymore. He was ashamed of me. He was mocking me. Something inside me snapped. The hurt, the shock, the years of quiet humiliation, it all coalesced into a cold, hard diamond of rage in my chest. I pushed away from the palm, my movements stiff, robotic. I walked over to a passing waiter and took a glass of champagne from his tray, my hand perfectly steady. The bubbles fizzed against the crystal. The men were still chuckling, patting Mark on the back. He hadn't seen me. He was too busy basking in the glow of his new, shiny life. I took a deliberate step forward, then another. My heels clicked on the polished marble floor, a steady rhythm cutting through the noise. One by one, the men in his circle noticed me. Their laughter died in their throats, their smiles faltering as they saw the look on my face. Dave's eyes went wide with panic. Mark, confused by the sudden silence, turned his head. His eyes followed their gazes, and finally, they landed on me. The smug, self-satisfied grin on his face evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His arm dropped from the blonde's waist as if he'd been burned. He opened his mouth, my name a choked whisper on his lips. I smiled, the iciest, most brittle smile I could manage, and raised the glass of champagne in my hand. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice barely audible. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly much older under the warm ballroom lights. His mistress, the little blonde thing, looked from him to me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes before it hardened into something defensive. I didn't throw the drink. That's what they all expected. A hysterical wife, making a scene. No, that would have been messy, uncivilized. That would have made me the spectacle. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes locked on his over the rim of the glass. The champagne was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the fire burning in my veins. "An eyesore," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden pocket of silence that had formed around us. "You know, for a man with a master's in business, your vocabulary is surprisingly limited." I lowered the glass, letting my gaze drift dismissively over the blonde. Though I suppose I can see why. It must be hard to think of new words when you're recycling the same old lines. The blonde bristled, opening her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned my full attention back to Mark. "Don't look so terrified, darling. I wouldn't dream of causing a scene. That would be so unsightly." I let the word hang in the air between us, a poisoned dart. Dave and the other colleagues were practically vibrating with the need to be anywhere else, their eyes shifting towards the exits. "Sarah, please," Mark stammered, taking a step toward me, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "This isn't what it looks like. We can talk about this at home." "Home?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of any humor. "Is that what we're calling the museum where you keep your old, outdated possessions?" I took another sip of champagne, then raised my glass high, projecting my voice to the tables nearest to us. Several conversations faltered as people turned to look. Perfect. "Excuse me, everyone," I called out, a brilliant, false smile plastered on my face. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I'd like to propose a toast." Mark's eyes widened in horror. He knew what was coming. He tried to grab my arm, but I sidestepped him gracefully. "A toast," I continued, my voice ringing with mock cheer. "To my husband, Mark, the hardest working man I know, a man who gives so much of himself to his work and to his colleagues." My eyes found the blonde's. She was staring at me, her smugness replaced by a dawning comprehension. I gave her a tiny, condescending nod. A man who sacrifices so much, he can't even bear to bring his loving wife to these events, for her own good, of course, to protect her. I paused, letting the silence stretch, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on us. Then I delivered the final blow. So let's all raise a glass to Mark, and to the real reason he keeps me at home, to his eyesore. A collective gasp rippled through our audience. The word, now public, was ugly and undeniable. I saw Mark's boss, a stern-looking man named Mr. Harrison, staring at our little drama from a nearby table, his expression one of pure disgust. Mark's face was a mottled mess of red and white. He looked utterly, completely destroyed. I hadn't just exposed his affair, I had exposed his character. I had taken the insult he used to belittle me in private and turned it into his public shame. I brought the glass to my lips, drained the last of the champagne, and placed the empty flute delicately on a passing waiter's tray. Without another word, without another glance at the wreckage of my husband, I turned on my heel. The sapphire dress, my armor swished around my legs as I walked, head held high, through the parted sea of shocked faces and whispering guests. I didn't stop until I was out of the hotel lobby and the cold night air hit my face. The rage and adrenaline that had propelled me through the ballroom began to subside, leaving behind a terrifying, cavernous emptiness. I had won the battle in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. But as I stood there on the curb, the city lights blurring through the sudden tears in my eyes, I realized I was now facing a war. I had just publicly humiliated a very proud, very cruel man. And then a thought, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through the fog of my pain. For 15 years, I wasn't just his wife. I was his bookkeeper, his scheduler, his unofficial business manager. I'd handled every contract, every tax form, every private investment. He called me an eyesore, a piece of his past to be hidden away. He seemed to have forgotten that I was the one who built the pedestal he was standing on, and I knew exactly where all the cracks were. My phone started ringing before I even hailed a cab. Mark. I ignored it. It rang again, ignored. Then came the texts, a frantic barrage of apologies, accusations, and desperate pleas. How could you do that to me? Followed by, I'm so sorry, we need to talk. And the classic, you've ruined everything. I turned the phone off. The silence was a balm. Ruined everything? Oh, darling, I was just getting started. The next morning, I was a woman on a mission. While Mark was likely nursing the world's most deserved hangover and fielding calls from his mortified boss, I was in my home office. It was the one room in the house that was truly mine, filled with file cabinets and spreadsheets that chronicled the rise of his career. For years, I had poured my intellect and energy into his success, meticulously managing his finances, finding loopholes, and making shrewd investments he would later take credit for at dinner parties. He saw me as a glorified secretary. He'd forgotten I had a degree in forensic accounting. I spent the next 2 days fueled by black coffee and righteous fury. I compiled every document, every email, every hidden ledger I had maintained. There were the business expenses that were actually weekend trips with his mistress, a new one every few years, it seemed. There were the undeclared bonuses funneled into a private account I'd discovered years ago, but had naively believed was a surprise fund for our future. Worse, and then there was the crown jewel, a series of questionable deals with a supplier that skirted the very edge of legality, a venture he'd bragged to me about after too much whiskey one night, confident his frumpy wife wouldn't understand the complexities. I understood them perfectly. By the time his lawyer called, I was ready. He was a shark named Peterson, oozing condescending charm. He started by offering a generous settlement for my silence, a pittance that was a fraction of what I was entitled to. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and cool, "I suggest you tell your client to check his portfolio, specifically the offshore account in the Caymans, the one he thinks I don't know about." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "I'm not sure what you— Oh, I think you are," I interrupted. "And while you're at it, ask him about the kickbacks from Sterling Imports. I have a feeling his partners, not to mention Mr. Harrison, would find those transactions fascinating. I've taken the liberty of compiling a comprehensive dossier, a sort of greatest hits of your client's ethical flexibility." The call ended abruptly. The next one I received was from Mark. He sounded broken, his booming voice reduced to a pathetic whine. He begged, he pleaded, he even tried to cry. He told me he loved me, that he'd made a terrible mistake. "Your mistake wasn't cheating on me, Mark," I told him, the last vestiges of my old affection turning to ash. "Your mistake was underestimating me. You didn't just want a wife. You wanted an unpaid business partner, an accountant, and a housekeeper, all wrapped up in a pretty, silent package. But the package got old, didn't it? It became an eyesore. Well, this eyesore has seen everything, and she's ready to talk." The divorce was swift and brutal. My dossier ensured there was no negotiation. I got the house, a significant portion of his assets, including half of that secret Cayman account and alimony payments that made his eyes water. His mistress, whose name I learned was Tiffany, vanished the moment the financial scandal hit the company newsletter. Mr. Harrison fired Mark for ethical violations, using a morality clause in his contract. The man who had mocked me in a crowded ballroom was now unemployed, unhoused, and a pariah in the industry I had helped him conquer. About 6 months later, I was having lunch at a chic little bistro downtown, the kind of place Mark used to say was too pretentious. I had sold the big, empty house and bought a beautiful condo with a view of the city. I was wearing a crimson dress, not to impress anyone, but because the color made me feel powerful. As I was sipping my wine, I saw him. He was a waiter. His expensive suit was replaced with a stained black apron, his confident swagger gone, replaced by a weary slump. He was clearing a table nearby when he looked up and our eyes met. For a moment, I saw a flash of the old Mark, the arrogance, the fury. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by something I never thought I'd see on his face: shame. He quickly looked away, hurrying back toward the kitchen like a scolded dog. He didn't want to be seen. I watched him go, and I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering anger, not even a shred of satisfaction. Just a quiet, peaceful emptiness where all the hurt used to be. I had taken his insult and used it to sharpen myself into a weapon. He had called me an eyesore, a thing to be hidden. But now, sitting in the sunlight, vibrant and free, I was the one who was truly seen, and he was the one who had disappeared. I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to him, but to myself, to the woman he tried to break, and the powerhouse she became instead.